Thanks, Isabel, and thank you all for coming out. So, in my little blurb about this event, I said something about poetics and words and a practice that somehow incorporates poetry. And I had some people say they weren't coming, wanted to but couldn't come, and were particularly attracted to the bit about words. So I thought I should prepare. So I got like 6 pages of words. And it feels really strange because it's like a lecture, right? And this doesn't feel like a lecture. This feels like it should be more like a conversation. So I'm gonna sort of go back and forth between some of these actual words and then just made up words, okay? And I am going to talk about those things that you identified. So I want us to start just by saying that, so I'm an artist. I've been making media art for 35 or 40 years, I don't know. And recently, and all through that time, I've often worked in collaboration. In the 1980s, I started a group called United Media Arts, which was a collective of artists that came together to do projects like this. I helped start a group in Toronto called Toronto Community Videotex, which later transformed into Interaccess. So I've always been drawn to working with others. Through my art career, I've done a lot of sort of self-initiated works, solo, singly, individually initiated works, as artists do. But even in those, they would often end up being in some form of collaboration or another. So if I'm working with actors, you collaborate with the actors, or if you're working with a crew, or you're working with technicians or researchers, there's often an element of collaboration. But in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working in Durham, the town that I live in, an hour north of here, an hour and a half north of here, with a group, and we call ourselves the Interference Ensemble. So and this is one incarnation of the Interference Ensemble. But the Interference Ensemble was started by one other artist, Tony Massett and myself, and Tony's at the far end of that picture. And we've done projects, a number of projects over the years. One project that we did we put together a brass band, a marching band of sorts, to play a particular role in a particular series of performances that we were working on. And then that band actually stayed together and now has its own identity as the Durham Sauntering Band. And it's not most of these people, but some of these people. Okay, now I'll go to the written words. Okay, those were just, I was just improvising there. Did you see that? So art making in collaboration foregrounds dialogue and conversation. Dialogue and conversation are very different word uses from the lecture or narrative or artist talk. Much speech, monologue or dialogue, works by making reference to assumed commonalities. When I talk about coffee or the Antarctica or boredom, I'm counting on you having a familiarity with those references that parallel my own. This is a principal weakness of language. This is only like 5 minutes long, so don't worry. This is a principal weakness of language. It can only reference or index. It cannot actually convey, except for the fruit of a very small subset of human production called ideas. Ideas can be conveyed or delivered by words because they're largely made out of words or language. That's why Chris Burden's conceptual artwork, Shoot, can be successfully understood through its description. An artist has a friend, shoot him in the arm. That's the piece. You know everything about it. You know the work as well as just about anybody. No description of coffee could come close to such a succinct fullness of description. If you don't know what coffee is, and you've never seen coffee or heard of coffee or smelled coffee, there's no way that I could describe to you what coffee is. So ideas and words live close to each other, but very little, in my experience, stems from words or can be adequately conveyed by words. This is my central reason for continuing to make art. At the same time, much of the art I'm involved in making contains words, but these are words at the limit of what can be expressed, at the failure of the ability to communicate by any other means, as the poet and critic Alan Grossman would say. So these are two, here's one quite old work that incorporates words, which I actually created in using Flash software. I don't know if you remember Flash, those are the media producers in the room. It's now defunct, and just last month I got a notice from Chrome, from Google, that said Chrome will no longer support Flash after next month. So this piece will no longer be viewable anywhere in the world, I imagine, after next month. But c'est la vie. So this was presented as a keyboard that was, I have a photo somewhere, it was a keyboard that was bolted to the sidewalk on a street in front of a shop window, and inside the shop window was a monitor displaying this, and people could come up and press the keys on the keyboard, and this is what would happen if they did.
New, blundering, Norway.
Kindly remove your hat, sir. Direct access is not always possible.
Foreign, frighten, obfuscate, ragtag, earthly, idiot, indolent, yellow, new, X-Files.
Xerography can't be an art form.
Organized.
Other people have good ideas.
Meandering.
Direct access is not always possible.
Army. Sam Brown.
So creating an interactive experience obviously introduces an element of randomness, and so randomness sort of drove the writing process. So it was written text, prepared and recorded, and that people would trigger it and make different combinations of textual sounds with the keyboard. But it was kind of like a game. It was a playful experience. The other one, I'm not allowed to put these on my shirt, so I keep losing them. That really highlights words is this short performance.
You come, you care, you find me. Stars shine through all these worries. Cold brambles tear our costumes. Cold brambles tear our clothes. Smiles slide across our faces. Fingers drum slowly in our laps. Toes tap nervously near dawn. Players stagger home feeling like crap. My love, I cried there. You twist and veer away now. Sad, sorry tales emerge from dreams, details misremembered. You come, you care, you find me. Stars shine through all these worries. Cold brambles tear my costume. Cold brambles tear my clothes. My eyes turn blood red.
So a work that, in my mind, sort of highlights the limits of what could be expressed through poetry and art, and the failure of the ability to communicate by any other means. I'm not going to force that reading on you, but that's one way of looking at it. Okay, I'm going to take just a little detour before getting to some more recent work. And I want to talk about the way that I was saying the shared references has an inherent hazard in it. Clearly, social and cultural references and assumptions and norms are rightly being contested all over the place. But I've recently become concerned with the impact of cognitive diversity on our ability to assume the commonality of experience and therefore communication. I recently learned about a thing called aphantasia. And aphantasia is a situation where an individual does not form mental images in their mind that approximate visual images. If I say, imagine an elephant, many of us will conjure an image of an elephant in your mind, a gray animal with a long nose. You're probably doing it right now. But some of you may not actually picture this in your mind. You will affirm that elephants are gray and that they have trunks, but you can't, some people can't close their eyes and pull forth, summon an image of an elephant. It's just not possible for them. Of course, like most things, aphantasia would be experienced on a spectrum. Photographic memories and an inability to form mental images at all would be the two extremes of this spectrum. But each of us would be somewhere in between on the spectrum. And you would have no way of knowing that your internal visualizations are different from your neighbors. You're going to assume that other people imagine things in their minds the same way that you imagine things. It's kind of like being colorblind and never knowing that you're colorblind. Another spectrum that raises questions is the way that sociopathy is measured and defined. I don't know a lot about this, but I understand that there's a number of factors that are weighed on a scale. And the scale is from 1 to 40, or 35, or something like that. And when you're measured, if you score over 28, you're considered a sociopath. Most people score around 4 or 5 or 6. So this is another spectrum. Where are you on that spectrum? What happens if you score a 15 or an 8 or a 1? Like, how is your experience of the world different from somebody else who's scoring a 28 or a 38 or a 4 or a 5, which is considered sort of, more typical? So these two examples of internal cognitive experiences existing on spectrums in ways that we haven't really manifest or made evident before, I think really undermines the whole idea that we can communicate by referencing common experiences. Using language as a referent or an index to things that I'm assuming that you understand is inherently flawed and going to create all sorts of problems. Okay, so going back to art making. So I haven't really incorporated this line of inquiry into making yet, except that it's been lurking in the back of my mind for like a couple of years, and it causes me to think about imagery differently. It hasn't yet I haven't figured out how to turn that thinking into a different course of action, but that's next on my to-do list. And I'm sort of talking about it here as one step in moving down the road towards that to-do list. So I suggest that at its best, art does not invoke metaphor. It does not use shared references as a kind of shorthand. It does not reside in the limited landscape of ideas. It creates its own presence in your world and in my world. Duchamp said, "The difference between what the artist is trying to do and what the artwork actually does is the work of the work." Let's say dreams are a direct experience, part of being. When, upon waking, we force these round pegs into square holes that are our memories, or worse, when we reduce them almost always unsuccessfully to words, we are turning our backs on what really happened or what we were really doing when we were dreaming. When we describe dreams in the language of film or visuals or characters or narratives, we're falling into the trap of metaphor and dumbing down the experience. When dream analysis became a therapeutic tool a century ago, we distanced ourselves from one more facet of being or experience simply because it fell into the realm of experience that was ill-suited for understanding through language. I always thought it was really strange that, Freud kind of invented the subconscious 100 years ago. Like, what did we do before we had subconscious? Before we had conscious and subconscious, and before dreams were conceived of as being an internal process. What did we do with all these feelings and thoughts and experiences that we now attribute to the subconscious? Okay, so let's look at some artwork. The first thing I'm going to show you is the last thing that I was involved in making, and it's called First Train, Last Train, and it's actually on exhibit right now at the Durham Art Gallery. I was supposed to have ended last week, but it's held over for a couple of weeks, so you can rush up there if you want. I'll show you a little bit what it looks like. This was done with Anna Gruda, Tony Massett, and myself, and our friend Mark Mariash did the sound. He's a musician. I'll pause there. By the way, if you have questions or anything, feel free to interject, because you might forget if you got a. So this piece is it's at the Durham Art Gallery, and it was 2 screens that are roughly 30 feet long each, about 10 feet apart, 8 or 10 feet apart from each other, right in the center of the gallery. There's 4 projectors, 2 on either side, illuminating the screens. And the work started with a vision that Anna had, and so in the gallery, she sometimes volunteers in the gallery and conducts art workshops there and things like that. So she was in the gallery one time and remembered that something that we all know about the Durham Art Gallery is that it's built on former railway lands. So the railway was in town, they closed down in the 70s or something like that, and they pulled out the tracks and gave the property typically to the municipalities and said, do what you want with it. And some sold them and houses were built. But our municipality, Durham at the time, said to the art gallery that they could have the land. The art gallery was renting or was in the library or something. So the art gallery eventually built a property right on the old train tracks. And the architect who designed the building sort of built that into the plan. He centered the long, thin building right on the property. The door aligns with a railway bridge, which is across the street. So you can see the direct line. The sidewalk lines up with where the tracks were. And so the train would have run exactly through the center of the gallery. So Anna was in the gallery one day and just sort of drifted into imagining the train being there and like being able to almost put her hand out and touch the train where it would have been. Like, not that it was a physical hallucination or something, but she suddenly had this strong, visceral experience that was somewhere between imagination and memory. Memory because a train had actually been there, but imagination because she had not actually ever seen the train. The train had not been there while she lived there. So, so she wanted to sort of work on this. So Tony and I joined her and we worked for a year recording trains and talking about it and thinking about it and finally coming up with this form of presenting this an experience of the trains in the community, the trains in this one specific geographical location, and the trains existing in the memories and imaginations of people who lived in the town or who were there visiting the exhibition. So the exhibit has three components. This is one, the large screen section. Another was this short diptych. The image on the left being Lumiere's Train Comes Into the Station, a famous film, often referred to as the first film ever shown publicly. It's not, in fact, true, I don't believe. But the Lumiere brothers invented one of the very first film cameras and projectors, and they filmed this image on the left, and then they showed it in a cafe. And the urban myth is that the audience jumped out of their seats when the train was coming towards them because they didn't know, they'd never seen a film before. And so they couldn't separate the imaginary image of the train from a real train. Something that we can do, obviously, and we look at that and chuckle. But that sort of unfamiliar cognitive dissonance is the sort of thing that I was talking about a little bit before. So we found a steam engine and did our own train, recorded our own version. We didn't get it right. We had our train stop. It should have gone a little further. But the people were milling about, and it was just one more way for us to sort of interrogate the idea of the train as living in memory. So we had the big installation of the train in the gallery, and then we have this mythical first film ever shown train, which we paralleled. And then the third component of the same show, which we consider the three actually all part of one work, is interviews. We did 16 interviews with local old folks who had worked on the railway or had memories of the railway crossing their farm when they were a kid. And we did these short interviews, about 5 minutes long each, and just showed them. And it was very popular. A lot of people came in because they wanted to see, their uncle talking about the experience that he or she had on with the trains. But when we did that, we had another sort of interesting experience with language, and that was that we had to subtitle them. We decided we wanted to close caption or open caption all the videos so that anybody could see them, even people with hearing problems. So captioning videos is a challenge. So we've done it lots of times before, and the way that we typically do it is we upload it to YouTube. YouTube will auto-caption things, and then you can download that as a text file, and then you can clean it up because it's full of mistakes, and then you can incorporate that into your editing software. And it just saves a lot of the trouble of actually transcribing, like hours of spoken language. The thing is that the text that you get back from YouTube needs tweaking. YouTube doesn't put in punctuation, and sometimes makes mistakes. It hears things were wrong, but it's pretty good. It's like probably 90% accurate. They say if something's less than 96% accurate, it's incomprehensible. Like if you're losing 4%, then it just doesn't make sense. But so we had to go through and fix this up. But we had a kind of a strange experience as we were doing that. Where is that? So this is what the text looks like that you get back from YouTube. And this is the first interview. I'm just going to read to you the way that I read this. And I've heard these texts, so I know when YouTube's made a mistake, so I'll sort of correct on the fly. Or 2 trains ran through Durham, the one that came just at the bottom of the hill here and across where the walkway bridge is, that was that in 1908, that it came into town. Oh yes, because my father was born that year. That's how I sort of remember. But I was in high school here in town, and at noon we came home for lunch or dinner, we called it, and we'd go back across the bridge, the railroad track bridge, back to school. And that sometimes the train was coming. So if we could see the train was a ways off in the distance coming from the west, we knew we had time to hustle across. And I remember my sister taking us skating in the old arena that was up on George Street, the old one. And we're going across the bridge, and I wasn't very old. I had bob skates maybe, but anyway, my foot got caught in the track. And that some way and somehow there was a man came along and simply just turned it or something, got me out, but we were afraid. And at the school, which is not there now, it's ours. You could go to the fence and wave at the train if it was going through sometime, or they had a little car that they drove, the train rails, we'd go and wave if it was recess, and they'd wave back. I think that, oh yes, I did ride on the train, so she continues. So let me play that interview.
Two trains ran through Durham. The one that came just at the bottom of the hill here and across where the walkway bridge is, that was in 1908 that it came into town.
Oh, do you remember that?
Yes, because my father was born that year. That's how I sort of remember. But I was in high school here in town, and at noon we came home for lunch, or dinner we called it, and we'd go across that bridge, the railroad track bridge, back to school. And sometimes the train was coming, so if we could see the train away off in the distance coming from the west, we knew we had time to hustle across. And I remember my sister taking me skating in the old arena that was up on George Street, old one. And we were going across the bridge. I wasn't very old. I had bob skates maybe. But anyway, my foot got caught in the track in some way. And somehow there was a man came along and simply just turned it or something, got me out. But we were frightened. And at the old school, which is not there now.
So as we listen to her, she seems completely comprehensible and speaks just like we expect ordinary people to speak. And we're familiar with conversations like this all the time. But when we write text, when we're writing, say, a script or a scene or dialogue or something like that, we don't write the way that she actually spoke. The way that she actually spoke, if I was going to write it, would look more like that document that I was like this. So when we write for actors or performers, we use a writerly language and then have the actors speak in what turns out to be a writerly language. And this sort of revealed to us a potential area for investigation of going further into the speaking language. I know lots of people have done this, explored speaking as it actually exists, but this tension between the speaking and the writing, which I highlighted at the beginning of this talk, that I'm here with all these notes, is something that I think we need to explore further. And we started to with this piece. I think having these interviews and dealing with the memories. The one piece has it has sound but no language whatsoever. The second component has no sound and no language. And then this component has lots of language. So there's a sort of a tension and a friction that we're sort of we're trying to capitalize on there. Okay, so this line of inquiry exists as a question. So I consider a lot of my practice, internal practice, as the act of questioning rather than stating. I used to do an exercise with students. I teach at an art school, and I would do an exercise with students, and I was teaching a research methods class. So I'd hand out a paper at the beginning of the first class, and I would say, write a sentence on this and pass it back to me. And they'd all say, well, what do you want me to write? What should I write? I said, it doesn't matter. Just write any sentence you want and pass it back to me. And they would pass them back, and then I'd read them out. And I'd say, half of you wrote sentences, and half of you wrote questions. Or half wrote statements, and half wrote questions. So the ones that are writing questions are going to approach this whole thing about research methods in a different way than people who write statements. So I've just identified myself as one of two camps in the world. I'm part of the camp that asks questions. So another activity that I see as a series of questions or interrogations is the one human field of endeavor that exists within the shallow pool of language called politics. That is the simple systemic effort to coordinate a series of shared impulses and common needs while causing as little harm as possible. So I'm on my local town council. I got elected there a year and a half ago. And my my impulse to get involved there was stemmed from a curiosity and a questioning about the nature of democracy and the role of politics and how, like I've always thought about it as at a distance. I think we all do to some degree, but I wanted to sort of research it more, and I thought the way that I would do it is by running. So I ran once before in like 2002 or 3 or somewhere around there, and thought I'll just run as an exercise in studying this, and then I got elected, sort of surprisingly, and then was on for one term, and then didn't get re-elected. So I ran again recently and got re-elected, so I'm doing this for the second time. But the first time that I was there, I did make a work that sort of spoke about that a little bit. I'm just going to turn that down for a second. This is called Speech I Want to Know. And it has sound, but I've turned the sound down because the sound was on headphones. So when you would walk into the gallery, this is the first thing you would encounter. You wouldn't necessarily see that person standing there, but you would see this projection. So it's me giving a speech, probably a campaign speech, and then it's a series of bylaws, all of which were moved or seconded by me. So in the 3 years that I was there, I moved or seconded like a gazillion bylaws, because that's all you do at council, is you're just moving bylaws all the time. Everything is done by bylaw. And I thought this, this speaking by bylaw and this speaking by political speech, like giving formal speeches and things like that, was such a strange experience of language that I wanted to make this piece, and that's why it's called Speech. But then the soundtrack, when you put the headphones on, is this.
Look me straight in the eye and tell you that. Jesus, he came to tell us revolutions every day. Kind of sincere, kind of serious, kind of real. Maybe I'll stop and sing. Maybe I'll stop and pray. I want to know if that's all the stuff you're telling me before those things. Maybe hope is fleeting. Maybe it's here to stay. I want to know if you told me all the stuff you had to when you told me. I want to know. It doesn't hurt if you're talking, you're not talking. It doesn't hurt if it's in these things.
So the soundtrack is obviously in many ways undermining what you first experienced through the visuals, not by the least of which having a laugh track. So I would suggest that we know a thing by its boundaries. The example that you've heard, the fish doesn't know about water. But we do, because we can be either in or out of water, so we know the existence of water by its boundary. Dialogue, conversation, collaboration, and love, I would suggest that these shared activities highlight the boundaries of our solitary experience and allow us to participate in knowing. So that's why I do those things: dialogue, conversation, collaboration, and love. So that's the end of the written part. So let me just show you these last couple of pieces that were done with the interference ensemble. I mean, the one with the trains is interference ensemble, but the first thing that we did as the interference ensemble was a video performance called Correspondence. It was an hour-long. This is I'm going to show you about a 3-minute excerpt.
Hello. I'm very worried and do not know how to start this letter to you.
Hello, I'm very worried and I do not know how to start this letter to you.
But I ask you to give me a minute and I'll explain. Attention, all you.
Attention all me, attention all me, attention all you. Invitation to dance or to play back and forth. People like you, people like me, like you, people like me, like you. People like us don't have to work. People like us don't have to get up early.
But I ask you to give me a minute and I'll explain. Attention, all you.
But I ask you to give me a minute and I'll explain. Attention, all you.
For a long time I like you, and every day I see how you get out of the house.
For a long time I like you, and every day I see how you get out of the house.
Every day I look at you from the window of his house.
Every day I look at you from the window of his house.
I cannot seem to have the courage to come to you.
I cannot seem to have the courage to come to you.
I badly want to meet you.
I badly want to meet you.
You promised to write and didn't. It took 3 letters from me to extract the last one you sent, and in it you gave the excuse that you were helping your mother. It will surely develop. You are careless, as will develop that you will get more and more careless. You will surely develop when you are careless. You will manipulate together and see that sincere.
So that piece of correspondence, you heard the same text being reincorporated over and over again. It stemmed out of 2 pieces of correspondence that I received. One was I found a little Jemima Puddle Duck book on my bookshelf for some reason, and I don't know why it was there. And I opened it up, and in it was a letter written to my grandmother when she was 15 years old. And I don't know how I could have ended up with this book and this letter, after, she had been dead for 50 years at that point. And in it, it was an uncle named Harold who was chastising her for not responding to his previous correspondences that he's been writing to her, and it was on a company letterhead, and the company was based in Chicago. My grandmother lived in Montreal when she was a child. So this uncle from Chicago was writing letters to his 15-year-old niece in Montreal, chewing her out for not behaving properly in the way that he says, things will not come to a good end for you if you behave so, irresponsibly, and just this awful bullying letter. And then I got a really interesting spam email about the same time, and it went on and on about, I'm watching you and I know you and I've been looking at you from the window of the house and I really want to meet you, and if you go to my website you'll see photos of me, and I didn't go to the website, I don't know if there were photos, but it went on and on and on. Obviously written by, I think, a non-English speaking person, but written in a female voice. I assume it was written by a male author, but written in a female voice. So these 2 highly gendered correspondences fell in our laps, and we decided, so we spun those out to make this performance with these 2 young women actors, sort of just analyzing the text experience from many different perspectives. I'll go on I'm going to show you one more thing, and I'm going to show it to you 2 ways. And that's the piece, I'm going to show you the piece called Parade, A Journey. And this was last year, our sort of big installation that we did. And we worked for a year, a little over a year, on the theme of parades and community parades and collaboration. And we ended up doing 3 pieces that were themed on parades and incorporated many of the same elements, from one piece to the next, but sort of twisting it and taking it a different direction each time, and culminated with this one. So this was the installation. It's in a hockey arena in the summer. So it's 3 large projections, 12 feet by 18 feet, I think, forming a triangle. And on each screen is a separate image, and the whole thing is about 20 minutes long, so 60 minutes altogether, 3 completely different scenes on each side. And then it would loop and start over. So if you stayed, you could move around and see it from different angles and see different combinations of up to 2 images at a time. You can never see all 3 images, obviously. And then there was a live performance. So it played for 20 minutes, it paused for 10 minutes, and performers came out and performed live. And the performers left, and the video resumed, looped back to the beginning, played for 20 minutes, paused, the performers came out. And so that went on all day. This piece just kept looping. And this is a 4.5 minute summary. So this, on the three screens are three sort of separate narratives. One is the narrative of the guy pulling the boat. So he pulls the boat all over town, in the river, but also down the streets and through the park and the ball diamonds. And he's often accompanied by a sort of a mystical woman who plays a bowl, like a kind of a meditation bowl, a Tibetan bowl, or I don't know what they're called. But she has a studio that this is her practice, is doing this sort of sound bathing thing. So they're one narrative. Then there's another narrative of this marching band, this like 8-person marching band who pull creatures behind them and march all over town and go into people's homes and play uninvited in people's businesses and places like that. And the third is these two musicians who spend the whole time during the film wrapping themselves up with these yellow bandages in the dressing room of the hockey arena. And then when the film pauses, they come out of the dressing room, they wrap themselves up, and then they go out into the parking lot of the arena, and there's kids there who pelt them with green Jell-O. And then they come into the arena, and it's live. The actual people come live into the arena, and they cut all the ribbons off them, and then they leave and go back into the dressing room and start wrapping themselves in ribbons again. So the whole cycle repeats. And at the culmination, when all the performers arrive in the space, so they're all on journeys. It's called Parade, a journey. So they're all on different journeys, and they all come and arrive at the arena together and enter the space. And then a musical conductor friend of ours has these three sort of clashing musical components, and he sort of conducts them and brings them together in a manner of speaking. So that's that piece. But I want to show you an earlier version of the same piece. Because I said when we did it, we sort of, I wouldn't say workshopped it, but manifested it several times in different ways. So this was, we had the one band sort of figured out. Oops. And this is the Holstein Parade, which is a parade in a neighboring town which is famous for being non-motorized. So it's all horses and creatures pulling things. So we had put the band together at this point, and we made the creatures that the band pulls. So we entered the parade, and instead of being pulled by, humans pulled by creatures, we did it the other way around. And our composer friend created this very minimalist music piece. And we live streamed this to the Durham Art Gallery using Facebook Live. And there was a performer in the gallery who was interacting with this live performance.
She sits atop his two shoulders, looks out across a sea of heads. She feels tall and whispers in her father's ear, "I feel like I'm flying. I feel like I'm flying."
the end of that piece. That's how the performance ended. Okay, so that's what I do. What do you all do?